What is up, my martial arts fanatics? Welcome back to System Breakdowns. As always, I'm Coach Greg, and this month we're doing the system breakdown of Islam Machachev. Now, before we get started, I want to share this real quickly. For this upcoming month, for the month of September, we are going to be doing a contest, a voting contest, for you guys to pick who you want in a system breakdown. Now, the way it's going to work is this. For the next 30 days, I'm going to let you guys cast your vote. Everybody gets one vote that you can choose your top fighter that we have not done so far in the system breakdowns that you would like to see covered. Now, here's an added bonus. If you go to my website, devildogmartialarts.com, and you pull up our new address for our new location, and you put that in with your comment, your vote counts not once, not twice, but 3 times. So if you want your vote to count more, make sure you put it in there. And then whoever gets the most votes, probably it's actually be closer to like 15 to 20 days, not a full 30, because I need time to actually like record the video and stuff and to do the research that I'm going to need to do. But whoever gets the most votes, that is who I'm going to do for that next system breakdown. So be sure to cast your vote. That being said, let's get started with the man of the hour, right? Islam Machachev has been an absolute tear. He's everything that we expected him to be as this protege of Khabib Nurmagomedov. You know, this Eagle Fight Club, not only do they have great wrestlers in this great camp where they're really creating some amazing things, but there is a systematic approach to the things that they do out there. And Islam Machachev is certainly a great representative of that. As a lightweight champion, as a Sambo champion, he is coming out there doing some fantastic things. And he has a system that he uses, and he consistently can go back to and go out there and do the same type of striking, the same type of takedowns, the same type of work on the ground that allows him to be super successful. And we're going to talk about all that today. So that being said, stay tuned. Let's start getting the system breakdown of Islam Machachev. Okay, so let's start with Islam's striking, and then we'll kind of build from there, get into clinches and stuff like that. Islam Machachev uses his wrestling as his primary threat for striking, just like Khabib. When Khabib was out there, the biggest weapon he had was the wrestling threat. It does a lot to his opponents. You know, if I'm his opponent, look at the Volkanovski fight. Volkanovski had to get his striking in when he could, because he knew that at any time if Islam took him down, he might not be getting back up that round, right? That might be just him being on the bottom for the round defending. If he gets back up, great, but when he's standing, he's got to get it when he can. What that means is he's got to take some chances that he normally wouldn't, okay? He's got to strike in a way that's also very concerned about the takedown threat, because I can't just press forward on a guy like that because they're going to use that to get a reactive shot and take me down. So how do you engage with a guy like that? It's difficult. And so what he does is he kind of uses that as the basis for what he's going to build. Now, Khabib certainly did a lot of work here in his career to kind of establish the type of striking he wanted. And I think Islam has only taken his own Sambo and added on to that to make it even better. They've kind of figured out, look, you can have a really simple game plan from here and be very effective. So what does he do? He plays from a southpaw stance with a long guard. Very similar to what we talk about in the Nemean fight system. He plays this outside game, but he does it differently. He simultaneously is a counter fighter and a pressure fighter. It's not a combination you normally see. What he does is he continuously walks them down, putting pressure on them, moving them back towards the cage. This range, as he keeps the top hand position and a threat, he's very good at feinting a lot from the outside, which I really like about him. He's a very active feinter, very active with the top hand position, clogging the lane, making it difficult for them to implement some sort of an easy opportunism game where they can like work the jab and stuff and stay on the outside. He doesn't let them do that. He's too far outside of range. He's got this lane clogged. They have to do something to get past this boundary if they want to strike him. And when they do, they leave themselves open to counters. Now, if they don't engage, he'll start to throw the rear leg roundhouse kick. The left leg kick, or excuse me, the left roundhouse kick becomes a very important weapon for somebody who's not engaging. He goes, okay, you're not going to engage? I'm going to engage, and I'm going to catch you, and I'm going to catch you hard and give you something to really be concerned about. Not only does this roundhouse kick put him into a clinch range, which is where he wants to be, but a lot of times it'll also back guys up towards the cage, which is ideal for a guy like him. A lot of times when you are on the outside, if you throw big kicks, and let's say I've got 10 feet to get him back towards the back to the cage, or 8 feet or whatever, and I'm on the outside and I throw a big roundhouse kick, that guy has to back up to avoid it. Now he's up closer to the cage, he's up to the black line. This is great for Islam, who's putting pressure on him, keep backing him up, setting up his counters, setting up his clinches, giving him an opportunity to take him down or shoot and put him up against the cage. Very smart tactics. Now, the next thing that he'll do is as he starts to back guys up, he knows guys are going to try to throw these one-offs. They're afraid to overcommit on him. So what does he do? He stays on the outside range from a southpaw stance, and all he has to really do is work two different techniques. He does the left cross and the right hook. That's it. Basically, most of his techniques. He stays on the outside, forces them to engage with him by putting pressure on them and the threat of his wrestling. And when they start to throw, if they throw a punch, he goes on the inside and throws his big left cross. This is his best weapon. He is very successful at landing this. And people talk about what an amazing striker is. He's not an amazing striker. He's an amazing striker under the context of MMA because the wrestling threat puts his opponents at a huge disadvantage to begin with. So a guy like Charles Oliveira, he can back him up, put pressure on him, and when Oliveira goes to engage, throw the left cross down the pipe and land clean on him, doing significant damage. All he has to do is be on the inside and protect himself as he throws. He'll also do a lot of right hook stuff, very similar to what you talk about with a guy like Magomed Ankalaev. What he'll do is he'll stay in here, and as they start to come forward, bam, land that big right hook. Now, a lot of times he will put these together, but mostly he throws one-offs. Occasionally you will see, bam, bam, that left cross to a right hook. Very simple attack. Like I said, he throws two punches and an outside kick. That's it. That's basically it for striking. Why? Because all he has to do is be able to continuously force them to exchange in a way that they're not comfortable with, setting the fight on his terms, and then throwing a counter punch, making them vulnerable and exploiting that. So what does opponents do sometimes? They know that, just like in the Nemean fight system we talk about from the long guard, as you frustrate your opponents and make it difficult to access you, they now start getting frustrated and they start wanting to engage in more of like a blitz style tactic. They want to start covering ground and doing this kind of stuff. Here's a very simple solution for that. All he does, very similar to what you see out of like Lyoto Machida, what he used to do with like this, I call it the schoolboy defense. He ducks his head, gets his arms out, gets to a tie clinch, just starts pulling him in, and from the tie plum clinch, bam, throws big knees right up the center. He'll use this tie clinch to try to engage in a clinch that he is really looking for, right? He wants to get to the over-under clinch. That's what he really looks for. But he's more than happy to use this as a defensive tactic. As a side note, he also uses this if he gets backed up to the cage. He starts, and he can't get his underhooks and stuff like that. No problem. Tie clinch, knee strikes. Eventually, as he starts throwing these, guys start getting their hips back because, they are trying to put pressure on him to wrestle. He starts throwing these here. If they start coming hips forward and stuff, it's easy for him to start to get inside and get to his left underhook, which is what he's really looking for. So, as he's here, throwing the cross, they start to blitz. He gets to the tie clinch, throws the knees, and then from here, he's going to just start working to get his left underhook. That's really all he wants. He wants a left underhook so he can get to his over-under. What I like about Islam Makhachev is he understands better than anybody else in the UFC the importance of where they place their hips and whether you use striking or grappling to attack that. And this is really what his game plan is. Get to an over-under clinch, and if their hips come back, he throws knees to the body. He does damage to the body with striking. If the hips come forward, he throws them. And what I like about a lot of the Dagestani fighters, which I think is kind of unique to them, compared to a lot of American wrestlers who tend to be very focused on shooting, what I like is that the Dagestani guys, not only are they great at shooting, but they're great at doing trips from a clinch. They're good at doing inside trips, outside trips, sasses, all this stuff. This is something that they do that I think is an edge over most other guys in the UFC because they're competent not just at shooting, but also from a clinch doing this trip game. And this is a wonderful aspect of their game. So what Islam does is he goes here, he's in his tie clinch, throwing his knees, he gets the underhook, right? He's going to work till he gets to that. Sometimes he'll do just like a regular over-under. Sometimes he'll connect in a body lock style over-under. As he's here, as their hips come back, he starts throwing knees up the middle, right? Because we talked about it. Their hips come back, he strikes. The hips come forward, he throws. Not only does this bring the hips forward, but a common response that he will hit every time. Like I've seen it in like every one of his fights. He gets the over-under, they start defending, he starts throwing the knees up here, and what do guys do? They reach across to block it. It's the only tool that they feel like they have to defend these knees coming up to the side here. As they reach across and their hips come forward, look how this tilts my body. This is beautiful. It sets him up for the sase. He comes in here, he throws knees to the body. The hand reaches across, bam! And he does a lat drop sase. So clean with this. He hits this constantly. Now, in some cases, he's had cases where guys don't do it. He'll literally grab the hand and pull it across. But I think I've only seen him do that once. Most of the time, as he gets in here, the over-under, bam, he starts pulling on his tricep, throwing knees, and as they reach across, this is his trigger. He starts grabbing either the shoulder or the lat, steps in, pulls them right down. It's a very easy throw for him, and he can hit this constantly. In addition to this very robust style of over-under clinch game that he has, he also has a lot of other takedowns that work really well for him. And I want to kind of touch on something that you can maybe implement into your game and take out of this. First of all, he tends to be more focused on a proactive shot than a reactive shot, which is you see out of guys like GSP, where as they put forward pressure, he shoots underneath, right, taking advantage of that. Now, he's, of course, capable of doing that as well, but he tends to prefer to do more of a proactive approach, where he comes in here and he might throw a jab and shoot, right? He might step into a punch and then shoot. And what he generally tends to do is he plays this outside counter game, puts pressure on them, makes them forget about it once he lands on them and stuff like that, makes them start getting concerned with the striking game, and then he enters him. Now, a couple things that he does that I like. He'll do stuff like he chain wrestles really, really well. Now, a lot of these guys who have been wrestling for a long time, what I have found, and I think that's probably the case with him, he doesn't pre-plan it. He just goes in there and he goes for a shot. He knows that he'll come in here, lift the leg, and start to come back and trip here. If they start to defend, he'll start coming across this way as they lean forward. If that doesn't work, he'll drive them back to the cage, get to his underhook, and then he'll inside trip as he pulls them back, right? You'll see this kind of chain wrestling, or he shoots to one side, and as they start to defend this side, he comes around the other side and starts to hit single legs on the other side, right? This is all just a natural response for him because he's done these sequences so many times. He attacks, they respond, he moves, and he adjusts. He knows what to do because he's been there a lot. Now, I don't think a guy like me, who's 43, who hasn't grown up with that style of wrestling, can accomplish that, right? It just isn't in me. But you can pre-plan this stuff. And that's where you can start to get kind of caught up a little bit. So, for example, in my chain wrestling system, in the Nemean fight system, I do things like I shoot the same way every time, right? My first instinct is to go for the low single. But if I start to come here and they start to back up, I'll come up and I'll run the pipe. Right? If they start to kick their foot to the outside, I step through and I knee pick. Right? I have pre-planned responses no matter what they do. Right? If they start to come across and turn away, I shoulder shrug and I get the back. That kind of stuff. And what I've done is I walk through these, the different triggers, and then I start practicing drills where I shoot my single leg entry, I have my buddy give me a trigger. He doesn't tell me which of these triggers he's going to pick. He picks any one of them, and I adjust accordingly. It's a system where you can start to build these kind of responses in yourself, and I encourage you to do so. I can never get the wrestling pedigree of somebody like him. I can never get that kind of experience where I just naturally go to stuff. But what I can do is pre-plan responses in my head. It's a little bit slower. You know, for a guy like him, he doesn't have to think. So it gives him an edge. I have to think, even if it's just remembering what it is. It usually takes a split second. I know what it is, and the more you repeat it, the less of a thought process you need. The more time it takes you to think, the less likely you are to pull it off. It gives your opponent to just act. But the more you repeat this process and understand this chain wrestling system, you create one for yourself and you understand all the responses and you work on it, work on it, work on it, work on it. It starts to close that gap so you don't have to think as much and you can just respond. And that's what you're really looking for. So I want to kind of just touch on that real quick. Now, like I said, if he backs guys in the cage, commonly he'll do stuff like he'll start to underhook here, trip, and bring it back. If guys back him to the cage, he goes to that tie clinch again, trying to get to his over-unders as much as possible. But if he can't, he's going to start throwing knees and stuff like that. Then he's going to start working to his over-unders and turning them. If he can't get that, he's more than content to do stuff like get a whizzer and do like a Harai Goshi and start to drop them down this way. This is all in his wheelhouse. And because of that kind of chain wrestling style where he just go, 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 he's very dangerous from all these positions. But these are kind of his defaults from there. Okay? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happens when he gets into the ground. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, partially because I've covered a lot of this stuff in my Khabib Nurmagomedov breakdown, and also partially because of the fact I don't have my grappling dummy or my bob here anymore because I needed it at the gym, and also because my wife wanted it out of the house. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things he does and kind of recap those things. But for a more detailed breakdown for some of the stuff, I also encourage you to go back and do the Khabib Nurmagomedov breakdown. From the cage, a lot of times you'll see him do stuff like a lot of hip control on the back. And this is an important aspect. Sometimes very similar to what we talked about in the Kamaru Usman breakdown and the Habib Nurmagomedov breakdown from the cage. You know, he likes to go to the left underhook, like I said, but sometimes he'll get his head position underneath and start to come in on this side if he feels like the underhook is there, and then he grabs that far side wrist control. A lot of times he's going to start to pop off, get hip control, and start getting his hips on top of theirs and pinning them up against the cage. Then it's a bunch of mat returns and stuff like that. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention against the cage that I didn't mention last time, one of the things that you'll also see him do a lot is lifting guys up. And I mention this only because when he shoots and he does like a single leg against the cage, if he's in here, a lot of times as he starts to get a single leg in here, particularly if he's going to be on his left, he gets the single leg, or he'll get to a body clinch. And a lot of times what happens, he just hips forward, picks them up, and then brings them to the ground. This is a common tactic of his to kind of mat return them. Just lift him up. He's so freaking strong. Picks guys up and throws them. He will generally do this against the cage, right? He doesn't do this in the center of the ring. As he starts getting guys back up in here, he'll start to come in and do this kind of tactics, okay? That being said, let's get to the ground then, which is where I said I was going to go to. His general tactic, he wants to get to a half guard. And what he really likes to do is pin guys up against the cage in all of his top positions. If he's in a closed guard, which you're going to see a lot of, is as he's in here, he's going to start striking, throwing elbows and stuff like that, moving them back to the cage, and then he's going to stack, and he's going to be throwing bombs, elbows and stuff like that, because their head is pinned to the cage, and he's keeping their hips pinned so they can't start to swivel out and start to attack arm bars and stuff like that. Stacking against the cage is a very nice way to make sure that they cannot employ any type of an offensive game from a guard, and also to kind of lift those hips up and put them on the defensive where their head is kind of crunched down, and there's not a lot they can do, and he loves to do this kind of stuff. From a half guard, it's very similar. He seems to prefer the half guard. That seems to be his favorite. And what you'll see from there is, from the half guard, he likes to cross face. That is his modus operandi. And he'll start to come in here, put a lot of heavy pressure on here, and start to free this leg, right? He'll throw punches and stuff like that. Sometimes he'll sit through, get this leg free, and then he just works to a side control. And because half guard for him is so dominant, and especially because when he does this, he cross faces them up against the cage. You'll see him constantly working guys back, getting him up against the cage, cross face, using this additional boundary, the cage and the floor, to really pin them into spot. And then he starts to work for positions and starts to get his knee cut across, get his leg extracted, get to a mount or a side control. Most of the time what he seems to prefer is to get to a mount, throws bombs, forces the turn away, gets on a back. Once he's on the back, he will generally start to throw punches, just like Habib used to do. He throws punches, they defend the punches, he slips in the choke. They start to defend this hand, he goes back to the punches, he slips in the choke. A lot of times what you'll see also is from these positions, because he is pinning him up against the cage, common response for a lot of fighters is to start to work themselves back up against the cage and start to get up. This is where you see that standard Dagestani tactic where he's going to come in here, head position, triangle the leg, start to grab this rear hand, go for the Dagestani handcuff, pull them in, pin them to the cage, here, force a turn away, start getting on heavy on the top of the hips, and start to go for chokes. This is his modus operandi. He's going to go to it time and time again. And because he knows what to do from the ground and he's got a systematic approach, he can consistently hit it. And it's very tough to defend all these positions, because one of the things that Eagle Fight Club does very well is they understand not just jiu-jitsu, not just wrestling, but how to blend these into MMA, particularly when you talk about a vertical barrier, using that against his opponent. So pinning their hips from a standing position so that you can more easily control them from the top. Start to do things like a mat return, right? Pinning them up at here and then lifting them up. This is why I mentioned this at the beginning of this segment, because you can lift them up and start to turn them. Then once he gets them on the ground, getting to a half guard, using the crossface to pin them up here, right? So he can start to throw stuff and extract his knee to get to a mount. Forcing a turn away where he's on top of their back, getting the far side wrist control, throwing these threats, constantly threatening, advancing position, striking, and submission. Advancing, striking, submission. Constantly threatening this holy trinity of attacks on the ground. And this is what makes him so lethal there. Okay? To finish up, I've been talking about in these last couple system breakdowns, weaknesses in games. No system is perfect. Even these seemingly unstoppable systems of the Dagestani style wrestling I do think that there are some things that can be exploited in this game. It's very difficult, but it can be done. I think from a striking standpoint, Volkanovski was kind of getting the idea, but it took him too long to start to get there, right? I think in a rematch, Volkanovski might have what it takes to win. He kind of put down this nice kind of platform for a good example of things that you can do, particularly engaging and striking that is blitz in and out style, like almost like a point style, right? He gets in, he throws stuff, and then he gets out. The problem is that because Islam is so good at defending and just waiting for a counter, it's hard to engage in that, right? So I think where you start having some success is when you start playing a lot of calf kicking game, very similar to what we just saw out of like Pereira versus Jan Blachowicz, where you can start attacking that leg from the outside, right? Bam! I think to beat a guy like that, you have to close that range a little bit. And I know it sounds contrary, but instead of staying in the open stance, you might need to fight southpaw to beat a guy like that, right? Because if you give him the ability to have that range control, he can stop the jab. So what you want to do is almost reverse that process, close the stance, go to a right, go to your southpaw, hit a jab, and then get back out. Opportunism, leg kick and jab, leg kick and jab. Hit these opportunism strikes and circling out. You can't stay in front of this guy. You got to circle. I think a lot of times guys get in the habit of backing straight up, right? I need to be in here, bam, right? Constantly circling, making it more difficult for him to engage. You have to be able to disconnect quickly from a clinch. This is something that Volkanovski did very well. Putting hands on the hips, getting separated, not staying there, framing off, disconnecting from that clinch. I think you also have to have a good bottom game. A game designed to stand up against somebody who is a vastly superior grappler, right? Also, I think that threatening from the bottom is also very helpful. Thiago Moises did this, where he got a leg entanglement on Islam. I can't remember if it was a 411 with like an outside heel hook that I think he was going for, if I remember. As he started to go for this kind of stuff, Islam kind of gets stuck there. He's trying to work his knee free. He can't get it free. Now, do I think you can hit the heel hook on a guy like that and win a fight? No. There's a lot of dangers with leg locking in MMA. Guy stands up and he starts throwing bombs at you. It happens a lot. Leg locks become useful then to create a threat, to create space to get to your feet. So if you can have a leg lock threat from the ground, from an inferior position, you can threaten these type of attacks. You can create the space to stand the fight back up. In the case of Volkanovski, what we saw was his ability to stand back up. Once he realized Islam couldn't keep him down, he started opening up with the strike. And that's why in the 5th round, he really started to let loose on this guy. Because Islam's game is dependent on your fear of his wrestling. If you are not afraid of that and you know you can get up, his game kind of falls apart. And that's what happened when Volkanovski started to get a little bit more faith in his ability to get back to his feet. All of a sudden, Islam became a little bit less capable of dealing with this striking threat. And Volkanovski started putting pressure on him, started getting takedowns of his own and stuff like that, right? Started really getting into a top position. Now, all of a sudden, Islam's game kind of falls apart. And this is kind of like the thing. It's like Dumbo's feather. Once you know you can get up, it's broken. And that is the problem with a game like Islam's. Now, does it work 99.9999% of the time? Yes. It's worked so far. It's been very tough to deal with. And his system does allow him to have very low risk for striking. You know, one of the problems with a lot of these wrestling guys is the risk of just one punch comes out, just land something clean, and you're done. He is one of the guys who has taken the least damage in MMA because of his ability to keep a range control to prevent them from having easy access with this stuff. But it's not an invulnerable system. And I think that the right guy is going to come along at some point to thwart that. Now, I think the other issue is that if you get a guy, this is why I think Michael Chandler might be the guy. I think Michael Chandler might be able to beat Islam because he's so freaking explosive and his wrestling game is so good. And he's a very scramble-based like wrestler, right? Like, so he's going to throw wild stuff that's going to be hard to just sit back and clip him because he's so explosive to get into there. And when he does, his wrestling game is so explosive. I think Islam has troubles with a guy like that. I think that Chandler might be able to beat a guy like Islam. I don't know if he'll get a title shot anytime soon. You know, it's too early to tell. But I think that if I had to pick one guy in that division right now who could upset him, it's probably probably Michael Chandler because he is so explosive. But if I'm one of the other guys in the division, you know, Gaethje's and Poirier's, you have to start devising a system to deal with this. And I think a lot of it has to be based on getting to your feet, right? Being able to know that you can get back to your feet. One of the reasons Israel Adesanya is so successful, I think more so than even Pereira is going to be, is because against good wrestlers, right? He's had a lot of guys like Derek Brunson and stuff like that, that he can consistently keep the fight standing. You cannot be an effective striker if you can't keep the fight standing. And there's a lot of really effective strikers in that division. So, that being said, it was exciting to break this down. Islam Machachev is a fun guy to watch. It was fun to rewatch all this stuff for this. Like I said, if you are interested in seeing me break somebody down, make sure you cast your vote. You get triple the votes if you put the new address in there. So, thanks for watching, guys.